White millionaire CEO's manhood doesn't rise for the past 3 years until he sees his poor black maid. The eviction notice trembled in Amara Washington's hands like a death sentence written on cheap white paper. 7 days. That's all she had left before the marshals would come, before 8-year-old Marcus would ask why strangers were putting their furniture on the sidewalk, before she'd have to explain that sometimes love isn't enough to keep the lights on. Mara. Marcus's voice drifted from the kitchen, small and trusting. Is there any more cereal? She crumpled the notice against her chest, feeling the sharp edges of bureaucratic language cut into her palm. Final notice. Vacate the premises. No further extensions will be granted. The tears came hot and fast, 3 years of holding herself together finally cracking like ice under pressure. Just a minute, baby, she called back, her voice somehow steady despite the way her world was collapsing. She'd been saying that a lot lately, just a minute, as if time was something she could stretch, something she could bargain with like the landlord who'd stopped taking her calls. The apartment was silent except for Marcus's spoon clinking against his bowl and the distant sound of traffic 43 stories below in a world that moved on, indifferent to the fact that Amara Washington was drowning. She pressed her back against the thin kitchen wall and let herself slide down until she was sitting on linoleum that had seen better decades, the eviction notice still clutched in her fist. Tomorrow, she'd put on her brave face and scrub the floors of people who spent more on lunch than she made in a week. Tomorrow, she'd pretend that hope was something she could still afford. But tonight, in the darkness of her failing kitchen with her baby brother eating cereal for the 3rd meal in a row, Amara Washington finally allowed herself to break. Before we get deep into today's story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, you're welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we weave our dreams and hearts together through the magic of stories. Now, let's begin today's story. 43 stories above, Jonathan Whitmore stood naked in his marble bathroom, staring at his reflection like it might offer answers to questions he was too proud to ask aloud. The bottle of little blue pills sat unopened on his vanity, $500 worth of hope that he couldn't bring himself to swallow because admitting he needed them felt like admitting he was already dead. 3 years. 3 years since his body had responded to anything, since he'd felt desire course through his veins like liquid fire. 3 years of doctors with kind eyes and expensive degrees telling him it was psychological, while his ex-wife's lawyers had used words like irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. Emotional abandonment. As if he'd chosen this. As if he'd wanted to become a ghost haunting his own life. The shower water ran scalding hot, but Jonathan felt nothing as it poured over skin that might as well have been marble for all the sensation it provided. He'd built an empire worth 9 figures, commanded respect in boardrooms from Manhattan to Tokyo, had his face on magazine covers that called him the Wolf of Wall Street's sophisticated brother. None of it mattered when your own body was a stranger. The steam rose around him like expensive smoke, and for a moment, just a moment, Jonathan allowed himself to imagine what it would feel like to simply dissolve into nothing. To stop pretending that success and power were enough to fill the void where his soul used to live. The water continued to fall, and Jonathan Whitmore continued to feel nothing at all. Dawn broke over Manhattan like a reluctant promise, painting the sky in shades of hope that Amara couldn't afford to believe in. She'd spent the night on the kitchen floor with Marcus curled against her side, his small body warm and trusting even as their world crumbled around them. Mara. He stirred in her arms, his 8-year-old face still soft with sleep. Why are we sleeping on the floor? Adventure, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead that tasted like salt and lies. Sometimes adventures happen in unexpected places. Marcus smiled, because at 8 years old, adventures were still possible and big sisters were still magic. Will there be more adventures today? God, I hope so, she thought, but what she said was, always, baby. Always. The text from Mrs. Patterson had come at 5:47 a.m., emergency cleaning job. High-profile client. Cash payment same day. Can you be at 432 Park Avenue by 7 a.m.? Amara had stared at the message like it was written in another language, because good news was so foreign to her these days that she'd forgotten how to read it. Same-day cash payment meant groceries. It meant buying time. It meant Marcus could have something other than cereal for dinner. It meant hope, and hope was the most dangerous drug of all. Now, standing in the lobby of 432 Park Avenue with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime, Amara felt like an intruder in a world that existed solely to remind her of everything she'd never have. The elevator climbed toward the penthouse, and with each floor, Amara felt herself getting smaller. By the time the doors whispered open on the 43rd floor, she was sure she'd disappear entirely. But then she saw him. Jonathan Whitmore stood silhouetted against windows that framed Manhattan like a throne room, and despite everything, despite her fear and desperation and the eviction notice still crumpled in her purse, Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. He was beautiful in the way that broken things often were, all sharp angles and expensive loneliness. But when he turned to look at her, when those steel-gray eyes met hers across an expanse of marble and money, something shifted in the air between them. Something that felt dangerously like recognition. Something that felt impossibly like salvation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in years. "Welcome." And for the first time in months, Amara Washington felt her heart remember how to hope. Have you ever had a moment where everything seemed lost, only to have an unexpected encounter change everything? What do you think happens when two broken souls recognize each other across impossible odds? I'm dying to know what you think might unfold between these two. Drop your thoughts below. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the electric silence that had settled between them like morning mist. "Mr. Whitmore prefers the penthouse cleaned in sections. We'll start with the main living area, then move to." "I can handle the orientation, Mrs. Patterson." Jonathan's interruption was gentle but firm, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. "I'm sure you have other matters to attend to." The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly. In 15 years, Jonathan had never taken personal interest in the cleaning staff. But she was too professional to comment, simply nodding and gathering her things. "Very well. I'll be back this evening to check on progress." The elevator doors closed with a whisper, leaving them alone in the vast expanse of marble and morning light. Amara clutched her cleaning supplies tighter, using the familiar weight of spray bottles and microfiber cloths as an anchor in a world that suddenly felt unmoored. She'd cleaned dozens of wealthy homes, had perfected the art of invisible efficiency, arrive quietly, work quickly, disappear without a trace. But something about this man made her want to linger, made her want to understand why someone who had everything looked like he'd lost it all. "You don't have to do this yourself," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "I mean, explain everything. I'm sure you have more important things." "I don't." The words hung between them like a confession. Jonathan seemed surprised he'd spoken them aloud, his jaw tightening as if he could pull them back. But they were out now, honest and raw, and Amara felt something shift in her chest at the vulnerability she heard beneath his polished exterior. "Okay," she said softly. "Where would you like me to start?" He gestured toward the living area with its pristine white furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. "The marble can be tricky. It requires special pH-balanced cleaner, microfiber cloths in circular motions, immediate drying to prevent water spots." Amara's voice held quiet confidence. "I know marble, Mr. Whitmore. I've been cleaning it since I was 14. Something flickered in his gray eyes, surprise, maybe respect. 14. The question slipped out before he could stop it, and Amara felt her defenses rise like walls. She'd learned early that wealthy people collected sob stories the way they collected art, briefly fascinated, ultimately disposable. "My grandmother cleaned houses," she said simply, kneeling beside her supplies and avoiding his gaze. "She taught me that honest work has its own dignity, no matter where you do it." Honest work. Jonathan felt the words hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd done honest work? When was the last time he'd created something instead of simply acquiring it? His empire was built on manipulation, buying struggling companies, stripping them for parts, selling the pieces to the highest bidder. He told himself it was business, but lately, it felt like feeding on corpses. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. Amara's hands stilled on the cleaning supplies. "She was. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Taught me that poverty might limit your choices, but it doesn't have to limit your character." The pain in her voice was carefully controlled, but Jonathan heard it anyway, recognized it as the sound his own heart made in the quiet hours before dawn when pretense became too exhausting to maintain. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it in a way that surprised them both. "Thank you." She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw something in his steel-gray eyes that made her forget about the marble floors and expensive furniture. "What about you? Do you have family?" The question was innocent enough, but it landed like a grenade in Jonathan's chest. Family. The word tasted like ashes in his mouth. His parents had died within 6 months of each other 3 years ago, his father from a heart attack, his mother from what the doctors politely called failure to thrive, but what Jonathan knew was simply the inability to live in a world without her husband of 47 years. Their deaths had coincided almost exactly with the beginning of his condition. The doctors said there was no medical correlation, but Jonathan knew better. He'd watched his father build an empire only to realize on his deathbed that he'd forgotten to build a life. Had watched his mother wither away because she'd never learned to exist as anything other than half of a whole. "My parents are gone," he said finally. "No siblings. My ex-wife. Well, there's a reason she's my ex-wife." The bitterness in his voice was like a door slamming shut, but Amara heard the grief underneath it. She recognized it because she'd carried her own for so long, the particular weight of being the last one standing, of carrying memories that had nowhere to go. "I have a brother," she said, not sure why she was sharing but unable to stop herself. "Marcus. He's 8. She paused, searching for words that could capture the way Marcus's laugh could light up their dingy apartment, the way he still believed in happy endings despite everything life had thrown at them. "He's the reason I keep going when everything else falls apart." Something cracked in Jonathan's carefully constructed armor at the love in her voice. When was the last time someone had spoken about him that way? When was the last time he'd been someone's reason for anything other than board meetings and profit margins? "He's lucky to have you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Amara's breath catch. "Some days I'm not so sure." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, carrying with it the weight of eviction notices and empty refrigerators and the crushing responsibility of being the only thing standing between Marcus and the world's indifference. "I'm 26 years old, and most days I feel like I'm failing at the only thing that matters." 26. The number hit Jonathan like a revelation. She was 12 years younger than him, but she carried herself with the gravity of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast, too hard. At 26, he'd been worried about stock options and country club memberships. At 26, she was raising a child and fighting to keep their heads above water. "You're not failing," he said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. "The fact that you're here working, fighting, that's not failure. That's heroism." Amara's eyes widened at the intensity in his voice, and for a moment, they stared at each other across a divide that was about so much more than money. He saw strength in her that he'd forgotten existed. She saw loneliness in him that mirrored her own. "I should start cleaning," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." But neither of them moved. The morning sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden rectangles across the marble floor between them. In that light, with her dark eyes holding secrets and sorrows she was too proud to name, Amara Washington looked like something out of a Renaissance painting, beauty born from struggle, grace carved from adversity. And for the first time in 3 years, 2 months and 17 days, Jonathan Whitmore felt his pulse quicken with something that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the woman kneeling on his marble floor like she belonged there. like she'd always belonged there. "Amara," he said, testing her name on his tongue like a prayer. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore?" "Jonathan," he corrected. "Just Jonathan." She nodded, and when she smiled, really smiled, not the polite mask she wore for employers, it was like watching the sun rise over a city that had been dark for too long. "Jonathan," she repeated, and the sound of his name in her voice made him feel more alive than he had in years. "What do you think happens when two people who've been carrying the world alone suddenly recognize they don't have to? Is it possible for connection to bloom in the space between desperation and hope? Share your thoughts. I'm fascinated by what you think might be stirring between these two souls." The next 2 hours passed in a dance of stolen glances and careful distance. Amara worked with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible, but Jonathan found himself unable to concentrate on the financial reports spread across his mahogany desk. Every few minutes, he'd catch himself watching her, the graceful way she moved through his sterile space, how she hummed softly under her breath while polishing the marble, the gentle reverence with which she handled his expensive things as if they were treasures instead of just expensive distractions. She was cleaning the bookshelf in his living room, running her cloth over leather-bound volumes that hadn't been opened in years, when her phone buzzed. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade, and Jonathan watched her entire body go rigid. "Excuse me," she whispered, fumbling for the device with hands that suddenly trembled. The caller ID made her blood run cold. Lincoln Elementary School. "Marcus." "Hello." Her voice cracked on the single word. "Miss Washington? This is Principal Martinez at Lincoln Elementary. I'm calling about Marcus." The world tilted sideways. Amara gripped the edge of Jonathan's bookshelf, her knuckles going white against the dark wood. "What's wrong? Is he hurt? Is he?" "He's fine physically." Principal Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "But there's been an incident. Marcus, he collapsed during lunch. When we revived him, he said he hadn't eaten breakfast or dinner last night." The words hit Amara like physical blows. She'd given Marcus her last bowl of cereal that morning, had watched him eat it while pretending she wasn't hungry, had kissed his forehead and promised him everything would be okay. "Liar," whispered the voice in her head. "You're a liar, and now everyone knows it. Miss Washington? Are you there?" "Yes, I." Amara's vision blurred with tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here. Not in front of Jonathan Whitmore with his perfect life and perfect home that she was probably about to lose the job of cleaning. "I'll be right there." "Actually, there's more." Principal Martinez's voice grew even gentler, which somehow made everything worse. "We're required by law to report cases of neglect to Child Protective Services. They're already on their way to speak with Marcus." The phone slipped from Amara's nerveless fingers, clattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bones. Child Protective Services. The words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. They were going to take Marcus. They were going to take the only good thing in her life because she couldn't afford to feed him properly. "Amara." Jonathan's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong?" She tried to speak, tried to explain, but the only sound that came out was a sob that seemed to tear something vital in her chest. 3 years of holding it together, 3 years of pretending she was strong enough to carry the world on her 26-year-old shoulders, and it all came crashing down in Jonathan Whitmore's pristine living room. "I have to go," she gasped, dropping to her knees to gather her scattered cleaning supplies. "I'm sorry, I have to. Marcus is, they're going to." "Slow down." Jonathan was beside her before she realized he'd moved, his hands covering hers to still their frantic movement. "Tell me what happened." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her that had been barely holding together with prayer and stubbornness. "He collapsed at school," she whispered. "From hunger. They're calling child services, and I don't have." She couldn't finish the sentence because the truth was too ugly, too raw. She didn't have food. She didn't have money. She didn't have anything except love, And apparently love wasn't enough to keep an 8-year-old boy fed. Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten its name. The sight of this fierce, proud woman falling apart in his living room awakened every protective instinct he'd buried beneath years of emotional numbness. "How much do you need?" The words were out before he'd fully processed them. Amara's tear-filled eyes snapped to his face. "What?" "For food. For rent. For whatever's causing this." His voice was steady, businesslike, but his hands were still covering hers, still warm against her cold skin. "How much?" "I can't, you don't understand," she tried to pull away, but he held her gaze with the same intensity that had made him millions in boardrooms across the world. "Try me." The simple words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Amara stared at this man she'd known for less than 3 hours, this stranger in an expensive suit who was looking at her like her pain mattered, like she mattered. 3,000, she whispered. "For back rent, deposits, groceries. But I can't take your money. I won't be charity." "It's not charity." Jonathan's voice was quiet but absolute. "It's an investment." "In what?" He looked at her then, really looked, taking in her tear-streaked face and proud spine, the way she held herself like a warrior even while falling apart. In the golden morning light streaming through his windows, Amara Washington looked like every answer to every question he'd been too afraid to ask. "In you," he said simply. The words hit Amara like lightning. No one had ever invested in her. No one had ever seen her as anything more than capable hands and a strong back. But Jonathan Whitmore was looking at her like she was worth something beyond her ability to clean his floors. "I don't understand," she breathed. "Work for me. Not as a maid, as my personal assistant. The salary is $60,000 a year, with benefits and housing allowance." The offer tumbled out of him like he'd been planning it for years instead of seconds. "Move into the guest suite here with Marcus. He can transfer to the private school downstairs. They have an excellent program, and tuition is covered for employees' families." Amara's world tilted again, but this time it felt like flying instead of falling. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she felt that electric shock again, that recognition of something bigger than both of them. "I know you're brilliant. You spoke 3 languages to Mrs. Patterson when you thought I wasn't listening. I know you're dedicated. You've been supporting your brother since you were 18. And I know you're exactly what I've been looking for without realizing I was looking." "For what?" The question hung unspoken between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "This is insane," she whispered, but her heart was pounding with hope instead of fear. "People will talk. They'll say. Let them." There was steel in his voice now, the same strength that had built his empire. "I haven't cared what people say about me in years. I'm not going to start now." Amara stared at him, this impossible man who was offering her salvation wrapped in designer suits and penthouse views. Part of her knew she should run, should gather her supplies and her dignity and walk away from whatever this was before it destroyed them both. But Marcus was at school being questioned by social workers, and hope was such a rare commodity in her life that she couldn't afford to waste it. "Okay," she breathed, the word barely audible. "Okay." "Yes." Stronger now, more certain. "Yes, I'll work for you." The smile that spread across Jonathan's face was like sunrise after the longest night. For the first time in 3 years, 2 months and 17 days, he felt his heart remember how to race with something other than panic. "There's one condition," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "What?" "We go get Marcus together. Right now." Amara's breath caught. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His hands tightened on hers, and she felt the tremor that ran through his fingers. "I haven't had a reason to leave this apartment in months. But you make me want to remember what the world looks like." The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest and more intimate than any physical touch. Amara saw him then, not the powerful CEO or the mysterious millionaire, but the man who'd been hiding in his marble tower, afraid to face a world that felt empty without purpose. "Jonathan," she whispered, and the sound of his name on her lips was like absolution. "Let's go save your brother," he said, and when he helped her to her feet, neither of them let go. What do you think happens when two broken people decide to save each other? Can love really bloom in the space between crisis and rescue, or are they setting themselves up for heartbreak? I'm on the edge of my seat wondering what you think awaits them at that school. Drop your predictions below. The Bentley Continental purred through Manhattan traffic like a sleek predator, its leather interior cocooning them in a silence that felt charged with electricity. Jonathan hadn't driven himself anywhere in over 2 years. His usual routine involved Marcus, his driver, not her Marcus, navigating the city while he worked from the back seat. But today felt different. Today, he needed his hands on the wheel, needed the illusion of control as his carefully ordered world shifted beneath his feet. Amara sat rigid in the passenger seat, her fingers twisted together in her lap as she stared out the window at a city that suddenly looked foreign. The leather beneath her was buttersoft and probably cost more than she made in 6 months, but all she could think about was Marcus's small face when he'd kissed her goodbye that morning, trusting and innocent and completely unaware that his big sister was failing him in ways that mattered. "Tell me about him," Jonathan said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like warm honey. "Marcus." A smile ghosted across Amara's lips despite everything. He's everything good about the world wrapped up in 8 years of mischief. He loves dinosaurs and thinks Brussels sprouts are a government conspiracy. He reads at a 6th grade level but still makes me check his closet for monsters every night. She paused, swallowing hard against the emotion threatening to overflow. After our parents died, he didn't speak for 6 months. The grief counselor said it was normal, that some children process trauma through silence. But I was so scared that I'd lost him too, you know? That he'd disappear inside himself and never come back. Jonathan's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. He'd never had anyone depend on him the way Marcus depended on Amara, had never felt that crushing weight of being someone's entire world. His business decisions affected thousands of employees, millions in revenue, but it was all abstract, numbers on spreadsheets and profit margins. This was real. This was a little boy who checked closets for monsters and believed his sister could fix anything. "What changed?" he asked. "What brought him back?" "A stray cat." Amara's laugh was watery but genuine. This mangy orange tabby that showed up outside our apartment building. Marcus saw it through the window and just spoke. First words in 6 months were, "Mara, the kitty is hungry." We couldn't afford to feed ourselves half the time, but he looked at this scraggly thing and saw something that needed saving. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara she couldn't afford to replace. We named him Mufasa. He lived with us for 3 years before he got sick but Marcus still talks to cats on the street like they might answer back. He still believes in saving things. The image hit Jonathan like a physical blow. A traumatized 8-year-old finding his voice again through compassion for something smaller and more vulnerable than himself. When was the last time Jonathan had seen something that needed saving and actually acted? When was the last time he'd looked beyond his own walls of marble and money? "He sounds remarkable," Jonathan said, and meant it. "He is. He's better than me in every way that counts." Amara's voice broke on the words. "And I'm failing him." "No." The word came out sharper than Jonathan intended, filled with a conviction that surprised them both. "You're not failing him. You're 26 years old and you've kept him safe, fed, and loved for 8 years. You've sacrificed everything for him. That's not failure, that's sainthood." "Saints don't get eviction notices," Amara whispered. "Saints don't exist," Jonathan countered. "But heroes do. And you're the closest thing to a hero that boy has." The words hung between them as they pulled into the parking lot of Lincoln Elementary, a brick building that had seen better decades surrounded by chain-link fence and cracked asphalt. Jonathan had attended private schools with marble hallways and manicured grounds, but this place had something his expensive education had lacked: heart. Children's artwork decorated every available surface, and despite the budget constraints evident in the worn playground equipment, there was joy here. Life here. "I should go in alone," Amara said, already reaching for the door handle. "You don't need to. We do this together." Jonathan's hand covered hers on the handle, and that familiar electric shock passed between them. "You're not alone anymore, Amara. Not with this. Not with anything." The intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. She'd been alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone choose to stand beside her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "Okay," she whispered. "Together." The school's main office smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, all institutional beige paint and motivational posters that had seen better years. Principal Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, the kind of educator who'd chosen to stay in an underfunded public school because she believed in her kids even when the system didn't. But it was the other woman in the office who made Amara's blood run cold, Ms. Rebecca Stone from Child Protective Services, all sharp angles and clipboard efficiency, studying a file like it contained the secrets of the universe instead of the story of an 8-year-old boy who'd missed too many meals. "Miss Washington," Principal Martinez stood as they entered, her eyes widening slightly as she took in Jonathan's expensive suit and commanding presence. "I wasn't expecting." "Jonathan Whitmore," he said smoothly, extending his hand with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Miss Washington's employer. I understand there's been some concern about Marcus." Ms. Stone's sharp gaze shifted between them, taking in the expensive clothes, the obvious wealth, and the way Jonathan positioned himself slightly in front of Amara like a shield. "Mr. Whitmore, I wasn't aware that Miss Washington had found new employment." "As of today," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the quiet steel that had intimidated competitors and investors for 15 years. "Miss Washington is my personal assistant. She and Marcus will be relocating to more suitable accommodations immediately." Suitable accommodations. The phrase hit Amara like a revelation. Not an hour ago, she'd been facing eviction and counting change for grocery money. Now she was standing in her brother's school with a man who could buy and sell this entire district without thinking twice, and he was calling her his personal assistant like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I see." Ms. Stone made a note on her clipboard. "And you can verify Miss Washington's employment? Salary information? Housing arrangements?" $60,000 annually, plus benefits and housing allowance," Jonathan said without hesitation. "All documentation will be available within the hour." Principal Martinez's eyebrows rose. That's wonderful news, Amara. I know how hard you've been working to provide for Marcus." But Ms. Stone wasn't convinced. She'd been doing this job too long, had seen too many desperate families try to manufacture solutions when the state came knocking. "Mr. Whitmore, forgive me, but this seems rather convenient. Miss Washington's brother collapses from malnutrition this morning, and by this afternoon she has a $60,000 job with housing included." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Amara felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger, but before she could speak, Jonathan stepped forward, and suddenly the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Ms. Stone," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had made grown men wet themselves in boardrooms. "Are you suggesting that I'm lying about Miss Washington's employment?" "I'm suggesting that desperate people sometimes create desperate solutions," Ms. Stone said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. There was something about Jonathan Whitmore that suggested crossing him would be a career-limiting decision. "Then let me clarify something for you." Jonathan pulled out his phone with deliberate precision. "I'm calling my attorney now. He'll have all the employment documentation, housing contracts, and financial guarantees you require delivered to this office within the hour. Miss Washington and Marcus will be in their new home by evening, with a fully stocked kitchen and enrolled in the best private school in Manhattan by Monday morning." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Is there anything else you need to continue this harassment of a devoted sister who sacrificed everything for her brother's well-being? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Principal Martinez looked like she wanted to applaud, while Ms. Stone clearly realized she was outgunned by someone who played in leagues she'd never even heard of. That won't be necessary, Ms. Stone said finally. If Miss Washington can provide adequate housing and nutrition going forward, we have no grounds for further intervention. Excellent. Jonathan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Now, I believe Marcus has had a difficult day. Perhaps he should go home with his sister. Marcus Washington was small for 8 years old, all knees and elbows and huge brown eyes that held too much worry for someone who still believed in dinosaurs. He sat in the nurse's office with his legs dangling from a chair too big for him, clutching a juice box like a lifeline while stealing glances at the tall white man in the expensive suit who'd apparently materialized to save them all. Mara. His voice was small and scared as Amara knelt beside his chair. Am I in trouble? Did I do something bad? Oh baby, no. Amara pulled him into her arms, breathing in the scent of childhood and grape juice and the faint smell of the cheap shampoo they shared. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, that's all. Marcus pulled back to study her face with the serious intensity of a child who'd learned to read between the lines. Are we gonna be okay? Before Amara could answer, Jonathan knelt beside them, bringing himself down to Marcus's eye level with a gentleness that made Amara's heart stutter in her chest. Marcus, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. My name is Jonathan. I work with your sister now, and I was wondering if you'd like to come see where you're going to live. Marcus's eyes went wide. We're moving. To a place with a really big kitchen, Jonathan said solemnly, and a school with a dinosaur skeleton in the lobby. Would that be okay with you? For the first time since they'd arrived, Marcus smiled. Really smiled, bright and innocent and full of the kind of hope that made adults remember why they fought so hard to protect childhood in the first place. Can Mara come too? He asked, because even at 8 years old, Marcus knew that home wasn't a place, it was wherever his sister was. I wouldn't dream of separating you two, Jonathan said, and when he glanced up at Amara, she saw something in his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. Something that looked dangerously like forever. Do you believe in instant families formed by crisis and compassion? What do you think happens when a man who's forgotten how to feel meets a woman who feels everything, and they both have to learn how to be vulnerable again? Share your thoughts. I need to know what you're thinking about this impossible situation they've created. 3 weeks later, Amara stood in the kitchen of Jonathan's penthouse at 6 in the morning, watching the sun paint Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility, while coffee brewed in a machine that cost more than her old monthly rent. The transformation of their lives had been so swift, so complete, that sometimes she felt like she was living in someone else's dream. Marcus had adapted with the resilience of childhood, already making friends at his new school and regaling anyone who'd listen with facts about the Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton in the lobby. His cheeks had filled out, his laughter came easier, and yesterday he'd asked if they could get a cat for their new home, not because they needed saving, but because he wanted something to spoil. But it was Jonathan who'd undergone the most startling transformation. The man who'd barely left his penthouse in months now insisted on driving Marcus to school every morning, engaging in serious conversations about dinosaurs and space exploration and whether Brussels sprouts were indeed a government conspiracy. He'd had his home office converted into a playroom, complete with building blocks and art supplies and every educational toy money could buy. Most surprisingly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy it all, as if Marcus had awakened something in him that 3 years of therapy and medication couldn't touch. You're up early, Jonathan's voice, still rough with sleep, made her pulse quicken as it had every morning for 3 weeks. She turned to find him padding into the kitchen wearing nothing but silk pajama pants that hung low on his hips, his hair mussed and his chest bare. The sight of him like this, unguarded, domestic, beautiful in the morning light, made her forget about coffee entirely. Over the past weeks, they'd settled into a rhythm that felt dangerously like marriage. She managed his schedule, accompanied him to business meetings where her quick mind and natural grace impressed clients and competitors alike. He'd been right about her languages. Her fluency in Spanish and French had already closed 2 major deals. But it was the evenings that undid her, when they'd sit together after Marcus went to bed, sharing wine and conversation that ranged from literature to philosophy to their dreams for the future. Dreams that increasingly included each other. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, hyper-aware of how the silk nightgown he'd bought her clung to her curves. He'd insisted she needed appropriate clothing for her new position, but the intimacy of him selecting her underwear, her sleepwear, her everything, felt like a courtship conducted in Italian silk and French lace. Bad dreams. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, warmth and cedar and the faint scent of expensive soap. Good ones, actually. That's the problem. She turned back to the coffee machine, needing distance from the way he looked at her like she was something precious and fragile and utterly desirable all at once. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize this was all some elaborate moment of charity and... Amara. His voice was firm, commanding in the way that made boardrooms fall silent and her pulse race. Look at me. She turned reluctantly, and immediately regretted it. He was too close, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest. This isn't charity, he said, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. These past 3 weeks. I haven't felt this alive in years. You and Marcus, you've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost. What? The word was barely a whisper. Purpose. Joy. The feeling that tomorrow might actually be worth waking up for. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and she felt herself melting into his touch despite every warning voice in her head. Do you know that I haven't taken a single sleeping pill since you moved in? That my panic attacks have completely stopped? That for the first time in 3 years, I actually want to be alive. The confession hit her like lightning. She'd noticed the changes, the way he laughed more, the way his shoulders had lost their perpetual tension, the way he seemed to fill out his expensive suits with renewed vitality. But she'd assumed it was Marcus's influence, the joy of having a child in his sterile world. Jonathan, she breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, soft and desperate and hungry all at once. The kiss was everything she'd been dreaming about for 3 weeks, tender and demanding, gentle and consuming. His hands tangled in her hair while hers mapped the planes of his chest, and for a moment that felt like eternity, there was nothing in the world but the two of them and the electricity that arced between them like lightning. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. About why my marriage ended. About why I couldn't. Amara felt her heart stop. She'd wondered, of course, a man like Jonathan, wealthy and powerful and devastatingly handsome, living like a monk in his marble tower. There had to be a reason. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Vulnerability. Fear. The kind of raw honesty that could destroy a person if it wasn't handled with care. 3 years ago, after my parents died, something broke inside me. My body just stopped responding. To anything. Anyone. The words hung between them like a confession in church, sacred and terrible and brave. Jonathan. I've seen specialists, tried therapy, medication, everything. Nothing worked. I couldn't feel anything, couldn't want anything. Sarah, my ex-wife, she tried to be understanding at first, but eventually. He shrugged, but she could see the pain behind the casual gesture. She said living with me was like being married to a beautiful corpse. Amara felt tears sting her eyes at the cruelty of those words, at the damage they must have inflicted on a man already struggling with something beyond his control. That first day you walked into my life, Jonathan continued, his hands still cradling her face like she might disappear. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something. And every day since then, it's gotten stronger. You've brought me back to life, Amara. Literally. The weight of his confession settled between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. He was telling her that she was his miracle, his salvation, his way back to the world of the living. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. "Show me," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His eyes darkened, understanding immediately what she was asking for. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed him again, pouring 3 weeks of growing desire and tenderness and hope into the contact. This time, when his hand slid down to her waist, when he lifted her effortlessly onto the marble countertop, she didn't pull away. This time, when his mouth traveled from her lips to her throat, when his hands mapped her curves through silk that suddenly felt like armor she no longer wanted to wear, she surrendered completely. "Amara," he breathed against her skin, and her name on his lips sounded like prayer and promise and plea all at once. "I'm here," she whispered back, her hands threading through his hair as he worshipped her neck with his mouth. "I'm right here." And for the first time in 3 years, 2 months and 24 days, Jonathan Whitmore felt completely, utterly, magnificently alive. Later, much later, they lay tangled together on the Italian leather sofa in his living room, dawn streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a benediction. Amara was curled against his chest, her dark hair spread across his shoulder like silk, while Jonathan traced lazy patterns on her bare skin with fingers that still trembled slightly from the intensity of what they'd shared. It had been more than physical, it had been resurrection. 3 years of numbness shattered by a woman who tasted like hope and felt like home in his arms. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered endearment had been a declaration of war against the emptiness that had consumed him. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped behind a dam that had finally burst. Amara stilled against his chest, then lifted her head to meet his eyes. What she saw there took her breath away, not just desire or gratitude, but something deeper, truer. Something that looked like forever. "I love you too," she admitted, and watched something light up behind his gray eyes like sunrise after the longest night. They might have stayed there forever, lost in the perfection of the moment, if not for the sound of small footsteps padding down the hallway. "Mara." Marcus's sleepy voice drifted from the kitchen. "Are you making pancakes?" Reality crashed back like cold water. Amara sat up quickly, reaching for Jonathan's discarded shirt to cover herself, while he grabbed his pajama pants with the efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Just a minute, baby," she called back, her voice only slightly breathless. Jonathan caught her hand as she stood, pulling her back for one more kiss, soft and sweet and full of promises they'd have to make time to keep. "This changes everything," he whispered against her lips. "I know," she whispered back. "I want to marry you." The words hit her like lightning, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Marriage. To Jonathan Whitmore. The man who'd saved her life, who'd given her brother a future, who'd looked at her like she was worth something beyond her ability to keep his house clean. "Jonathan. I'm serious." His hands framed her face again, and she could see the intensity burning behind his eyes. "I want Marcus to be my son legally. I want you to be my wife. I want us to be a real family." "Mara." Marcus's voice was closer now, and she could hear him rummaging through the refrigerator. "We'll talk about this later," she promised, standing on shaking legs to go tend to the 8-year-old who had no idea his world was about to change again. But as she walked toward the kitchen, Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Amara." She turned back to find him watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart ache. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "these past 3 weeks have been the best of my life." Do you think love can really conquer the impossible odds stacked against them? Class, race, the speed of their relationship? When two broken people heal each other, is it genuine love or just mutual salvation? I'm dying to know what you think about Jonathan's proposal and whether they can make this fairy tale real. Share your thoughts. 2 weeks had passed since Jonathan's proposal, 2 weeks of stolen moments and whispered promises while they navigated the complex dance of becoming a family. Amara had said yes, of course. How could she not when he looked at her like she was his entire world? But they'd agreed to wait until after Marcus started his next semester to make any official announcements. It was a Tuesday morning when their carefully constructed paradise began to crumble. Amara was in Jonathan's home office, organizing files for his afternoon meeting with the board of directors, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Reporters had been calling ever since someone had spotted her and Marcus entering the building with Jonathan, but something made her answer. Amara Washington? The voice was crisp, professional, and utterly familiar despite the years that had passed. Her blood turned to ice water. Who is this? Victoria Whitmore, Jonathan's ex-wife. I think we need to talk. The name hit Amara like a physical blow. She'd known about Victoria, of course. Jonathan had mentioned his ex-wife in passing, had told her about the cruel words that had ended their marriage. But hearing her voice, cultured and sharp with barely concealed venom, made the woman reel in a way that terrified her. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Amara said, proud that her voice remained steady. Oh, but we do. Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. You see, dear, I know exactly what game you're playing. The poor little maid who seduced my broken ex-husband with her tragic backstory and wide-eyed innocence. It's quite clever, really. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let me guess. He told you about his little problem? How he hasn't been able to perform for 3 years. How you're his miraculous cure. Victoria's voice dripped with mock sympathy. Did he tell you that he said the exact same thing to me when we first met? How I was his salvation, his reason for living. The words hit Amara like bullets, each one designed to find the soft spaces where her insecurities lived. This isn't the same thing. Isn't it? Jonathan has always been drawn to broken things, sweetness. Stray cats, struggling companies, damaged women who make him feel like a hero. But the novelty wears off eventually, and when it does. Victoria's pause was perfectly timed for maximum impact. Well, let's just say I received a very generous settlement when I agreed to keep quiet about certain medical information. Amara's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. Why are you calling me? Because I'm about to become a problem for both of you. You see, Jonathan's board of directors is meeting this afternoon to discuss the company's image issues. Apparently, having their CEO living with his black maid and her illegitimate brother isn't the look they're going for. Stock prices have already dipped 3 points since word got out. The casual racism in Victoria's voice made Amara sick, but it was the truth behind the words that cut deepest. She'd seen the looks when they appeared in public together, the raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations, the barely concealed disapproval of Manhattan's elite when they saw Jonathan Whitmore with a woman who clearly didn't belong in their world. And here's where it gets interesting, Victoria continued. I've been asked to attend the meeting. To provide context about Jonathan's history with inappropriate relationships. What do you want? Amara's voice was barely a whisper now. $5 million. Transferred to my account by end of business today, and I'll tell the board that I fully support Jonathan's new relationship. That you're exactly what he needs to overcome his past troubles. And if I don't? Victoria's smile was audible through the phone. Then I tell them the truth about Jonathan's condition. About how he begged me not to leave, promised he'd get better, swore that he just needed time. I'll tell them about the medications, the therapy sessions, the complete breakdown he had when the doctors couldn't fix him. By the time I'm done, the board will have no choice but to remove him as CEO to protect the company's reputation. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Amara closed her eyes, seeing her future crumble in real time. Even if she had $5 million, which she most certainly did not, paying Victoria would only be the beginning. There would be more demands, more threats, more ways for the past to reach into their happiness and tear it apart. I need time to think, Amara said finally. You have until 5 o'clock. After that, I make my phone calls. The line went dead, leaving Amara alone in Jonathan's office with the sound of her own heart breaking. She was still sitting in the same position an hour later when Jonathan found her, staring out the window at a city that suddenly felt hostile and cold. Amara? What's wrong? He was beside her immediately, his hands on her shoulders, his voice filled with the concern that had become as familiar as breathing. She looked up at him, this beautiful, generous man who'd saved her life without asking for anything in return, and felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. How could she tell him that his ex-wife was about to destroy everything they'd built? How could she explain that their love had become a weapon to be used against him? Victoria called, she said simply. The color drained from Jonathan's face. What did she say? Amara told him everything. The threats, the demands, the board meeting that would determine his future. With each word, she watched him retreat further into himself, watched the man who'd learned to laugh again disappear behind walls of marble and money. 5 million, he said when she finished, his voice hollow. She wants $5 million to keep quiet about my condition. Jonathan, you can't. Of course I can. He was already reaching for his phone, his movements sharp and mechanical. It's just money. I'll wire it to her account this afternoon. No. Amara caught his hand, stopping him before he could make the call. You can't keep paying her. She'll never stop, and you know it. Then what do you suggest? For the first time since she'd known him, Jonathan's voice held an edge of desperation. Let her destroy my company? Let her tell the world that I'm a broken man who can't function without medication and therapy. Maybe, Amara said quietly, it's time to tell your own story. Jonathan stared at her like she'd suggested he jump off the balcony. You don't understand. If this gets out, if the board thinks I'm unstable, then we'll deal with it. Together. She stood, moving to frame his face with her hands the way he'd done for her so many times. You're not the same man you were 3 years ago, Jonathan. You're stronger now. We're stronger. Am I? His laugh was bitter. Because right now, I feel like I'm falling apart all over again. The words hit Amara like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stay strong. That's what Victoria wants. She wants you to feel broken, wants you to hide behind your money instead of fighting for what we have. What we have, Jonathan repeated, his voice growing colder, is about to be ripped apart by the press. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you once this story breaks? To Marcus? They'll tear you both apart just because you had the misfortune of falling in love with me. And there it was, the fear she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. The knowledge that loving Jonathan Whitmore came with a price tag that she might not be able to afford. So what are you saying? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Jonathan's hands dropped from her face, and suddenly he was the stranger in the expensive suit again, remote and untouchable. I'm saying maybe Victoria is right. Maybe I do have a pattern of dragging innocent people into my mess. Don't you dare, Amara's voice was fierce now, all pretense of calm abandoned. Don't you dare make this about some pattern or some need to save broken things. What we have is real, Jonathan. It's messy and complicated and probably doomed, but it's real. Is it? He was pacing now, his hands running through his hair in a gesture she recognized as panic. Or am I just a convenient solution to your problems? A wealthy man who could save you and Marcus from poverty. The accusation hit her like a slap. How can you say that? After everything we've shared, everything we've been to each other. Because I don't trust my own judgment anymore. The words exploded out of him like they'd been locked away for years. I thought Sarah loved me too. I thought I was saving her from her unhappy first marriage, giving her the life she deserved. But the minute things got difficult, the minute I became inconvenient, she was gone. I'm not Sarah. No, Jonathan's voice was quiet now, deadly. You're younger. prettier, more desperate, which makes you either the best thing that's ever happened to me, or the most expensive mistake I've ever made. The words hung between them like poison, and Amara felt something vital die inside her chest. This was what Victoria had wanted, to make them doubt each other, doubt what they'd built together. "If that's what you really think," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "then maybe you should wire her the money." "Maybe I should." They stared at each other across the expanse of his office, two people who'd found salvation in each other's arms now watching it slip away like sand through their fingers. "I'll pack our things," Amara said finally. "Marcus and I will be gone by evening." "Amara, wait." But she was already walking toward the door, her spine straight and her head high despite the way her heart was bleeding in her chest. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "I really did love you. Both of you, the broken man and the healed one. I would have chosen you even if you had nothing to offer but yourself." The door closed behind her with a sound like finality, leaving Jonathan alone in his office with a taste of ashes in his mouth and the knowledge that he'd just destroyed the only real thing in his life. Do you think some people are just too broken to be saved, even by love? When fear and insecurity tear apart something beautiful, is there any way back from the wreckage? I'm heartbroken watching them destroy each other. What do you think it will take for them to find their way home again? The silence in the penthouse was deafening after Amara left, broken only by the sound of Jonathan's breathing and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 43 stories below. He stood frozen in his office doorway, staring at the space where she'd been standing, her words echoing in his mind like a prayer he'd forgotten how to believe. "I would have chosen you even if you had nothing to offer but yourself." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. In all his years with Sarah, through all the expensive gifts and lavish vacations and desperate attempts to prove his worth, she had never once looked at him the way Amara did, like he was enough exactly as he was. Like his brokenness was something to be cherished rather than fixed. His phone buzzed on the desk. "Victoria. Time's running out, Jonathan. Have you made the transfer?" "No," he said, the word coming out stronger than he'd expected. "No." Victoria's voice sharpened. "Jonathan, don't be foolish. You can't afford to have this information go public." "Maybe I can't afford not to." There was a pause, and he could practically hear Victoria recalibrating. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about being tired of hiding. Tired of letting my past define my future." Jonathan walked to his window, looking out at a city that suddenly felt full of possibility instead of judgment. "I'm talking about choosing love over fear." "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I've made," Jonathan said quietly, "was letting you convince me I was still the same broken man you left 3 years ago." He hung up before she could respond. Meanwhile, 3 floors down in the building's guest services office, Amara sat with Marcus while they waited for their taxi, her brother's small hand clasped tightly in hers. He'd been unusually quiet since she'd explained they were leaving, his 8-year-old mind trying to process another upheaval in his young life. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked suddenly, his voice small and scared. "Oh baby, no." Amara pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of the expensive shampoo Jonathan had bought him, feeling her heart break all over again. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups just make things complicated. But I liked it here. I liked having Jonathan drive me to school and help me with my dinosaur project." Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He said he was going to teach me how to play chess." The simple statement nearly undid her completely. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from heartbreak that she'd forgotten Marcus had fallen in love too, with a father figure he'd never had, with a stability they'd never known, with a family they'd briefly been allowed to imagine was theirs. "I know, sweetheart. I liked it too." "Then why are we leaving?" Before Amara could answer, the elevator chimed, and Jonathan stepped out, still wearing the same clothes from that morning but looking somehow transformed. Gone was the remote stranger who'd questioned their love. In his place stood the man who'd knelt beside an 8-year-old boy in a school nurse's office and promised him dinosaur skeletons and hope. "Because I'm an idiot," he said, his voice carrying across the small space with quiet conviction. Marcus looked between them, confusion written across his young face. "Jonathan? Why are you here?" "Because I need to tell you both something important." Jonathan crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching something precious and easily spooked. "I need to tell you that I'm sorry. And that I love you. Both of you. More than I've ever loved anything in my life." Amara felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "Jonathan, don't. It's too complicated, too." "It's not complicated," he interrupted, dropping to one knee so he was eye level with Marcus. "It's the simplest thing in the world. I love your sister, Marcus. And I love you. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving it." Marcus looked at Amara uncertainly. "Is that okay, Mara? Can we stay?" Before she could answer, Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire. "Amara Washington," he said, his voice steady despite the tears running down his face, "will you marry me? Not because I can save you, and not because you can save me, but because we're better together than we could ever be apart." The ring was beautiful, a simple solitaire surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like promises, but it was the look in his gray eyes that made her forget how to breathe. This wasn't the desperate proposal of a man afraid of losing his salvation. This was the quiet certainty of someone who'd found his home. "The board meeting," she started. "Fuck the board meeting," Jonathan said, then immediately winced. "Sorry, Marcus. Forget the board meeting. Whatever happens with the company, we'll face it together. Victoria can say whatever she wants. The truth is, I was broken for 3 years, and yes, you healed me. But not because you're some magical cure, because you're you. Because you're strong and fierce and brave, and you saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Marcus tugged on Jonathan's sleeve. "Are you gonna be my dad now?" The simple question hit both adults like lightning. Jonathan looked at the little boy who'd stolen his heart with dinosaur facts and gap-toothed grins, and felt something settle into place that he hadn't even known was missing. "If that's what you want," he said softly. "Yeah," Marcus said with the easy certainty of childhood. "I want that." Jonathan looked up at Amara, this woman who'd walked into his life like sunrise after the longest night, who'd given him purpose and passion and a reason to believe in tomorrow. "What do you say?" he asked, the ring box still open between them like an offering. "Ready to take on the world together?" Amara looked at these two males who'd somehow become her everything, the brother who'd taught her what unconditional love looked like, and the man who'd shown her what it felt like to be cherished exactly as she was. The smart thing would be to walk away, to protect herself and Marcus from the scandal that would surely follow. But love had never been smart. "Yes," she whispered, and watched Jonathan's face transform with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood to kiss her with a tenderness that tasted like promises and second chances and forever. "So we're staying?" Marcus asked, because at 8 years old, the practical questions still mattered most. "We're staying," Amara confirmed, laughing through her tears as Jonathan spun her around like she weighed nothing at all. "And we're gonna be a real family?" "The realest," Jonathan said, reaching down to scoop Marcus up in his other arm. "You, me, and the best big sister in the world." As they stood there in the guest services office, the three of them wrapped in an embrace that felt like coming home, none of them noticed the photographer across the street capturing the moment through his telephoto lens, or the headline that would run in tomorrow's papers: "Whitmore's Love Story. CEO proposes to former Maid in tearful reunion." But even if they had noticed, it wouldn't have mattered. They had each other now, and that was armor enough against anything the world might throw at them. 2 hours later, Jonathan stood before his board of directors in the company's mahogany-paneled conference room, his hands steady and his voice clear as he looked around the table at faces that had known him for over a decade. Victoria sat at the far end, her expression smug with anticipated victory, but Jonathan barely spared her a glance. His focus was entirely on the men and women who would determine his company's future, and by extension, his ability to provide for the family he'd just chosen over everything else. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I asked for this emergency meeting because there are some things you need to know about me. Things that will probably be in tomorrow's newspapers, whether I tell you or not." He could see them shifting uncomfortably, could practically hear their internal calculations about damage control and stock prices and shareholder confidence. But for the first time in 3 years, Jonathan found he didn't care about their comfort more than his own integrity. 3 years ago, I suffered what my doctors termed a psychosomatic sexual dysfunction brought on by grief and depression following my parents' deaths. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For 3 years, I was unable to maintain intimate relationships, unable to feel desire or connection with another human being. Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph, but Jonathan continued without pause. "I tried every treatment available: therapy, medication, experimental procedures. Nothing worked. I became convinced I was fundamentally broken, that I would spend the rest of my life as an emotional ghost haunting my own existence." Board member Patricia Chun leaned forward, her expression more curious than judgmental. "Jonathan, why are you telling us this?" "Because 6 weeks ago, I met a woman who changed everything. Her name is Amara Washington, and she was working as a housekeeper to support her 8-year-old brother after their parents died in a car accident when she was 18. He could see the calculation in their faces now, the same arithmetic Victoria had been counting on: CEO plus black Maid equals scandal. "I fell in love with her," Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Not because she was convenient or available or grateful, but because she's the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever met. She brought me back to life in ways I didn't know were possible." "Jonathan," Board Chairman Richard Blackstone's voice was carefully neutral, "we understand that you've been through a difficult period, but surely you can see how this looks." "How it looks," Jonathan interrupted, "is like a man who was lucky enough to find his soulmate chose love over appearances. How it looks is like someone who built this company from nothing remembered that success means nothing without someone to share it with." He stood, moving to the windows that overlooked Manhattan, the city where he'd first seen Amara Washington, and felt his heart remember how to beat. "I proposed to her this afternoon," he said, turning back to face the room. "We're going to be married, and I'm going to adopt her brother. If that makes me unsuitable to lead this company, then I'll step down with no hard feelings." The silence stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, but Jonathan found he didn't care. He'd spoken his truth, had chosen love over fear, and whatever happened next, he could live with it. It was Patricia Chun who broke the silence. "The stock price has actually gone up 2 points since the story started circulating," she said mildly. "Apparently, the market finds your love story romantic." Richard Blackstone cleared his throat. "Jonathan, while your personal life is certainly your own business, we do need to consider the company's image." "Actually," interrupted board member David Walsh, pulling out his phone, "you might want to see this." He turned his screen around to show the room a video that was already going viral on social media. Security camera footage of Jonathan proposing in the guest services office, Marcus jumping into their group hug, the three of them laughing and crying and looking like the picture-perfect family America had been waiting to fall in love with. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. "This is what love looks like. CEO who adopts his fiancé's brother? My heart. Proof that money can't buy what matters most." "The public response has been surprisingly supportive," Patricia said, scrolling through her own phone. "There are already 3 movie studios asking about rights to your story." Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. So, Richard said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "it seems your love life is good for business after all." The laughter that rippled around the room was warm, accepting, and Victoria's face went white as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. "There is one condition," Patricia added, her expression turning serious. "We want to meet her." Officially. If she's going to be the wife of our CEO, we need to know she can handle the pressure. She can handle anything, Jonathan said with quiet confidence. But I'll ask her. As the meeting dissolved into discussions of PR strategy and damage control for a scandal that had become a love story, Victoria slipped out of the room unnoticed. Her leverage evaporated and her threats transformed into the very publicity that would cement Jonathan and Amara's place in Manhattan society. Sometimes, Jonathan reflected as he watched her go, the truth really was the most powerful weapon of all. What do you think happens when love becomes stronger than fear, when truth becomes more powerful than shame? Can a fairy tale really survive in the real world, or are Jonathan and Amara about to face challenges they never imagined? Share your thoughts. I'm dying to know what you think comes next for this impossible family they're building together. 3 months had passed since the board meeting that had changed everything. 3 months since Jonathan Whitmore had chosen love over fear and watched the world embrace them in ways he'd never imagined possible. Their engagement had become the stuff of fairy tales. The CEO who found his soulmate in a woman scrubbing his floors, the family forged by love rather than blood, the second chance that proved redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to reach for it. But fairy tales, Jonathan was learning, came with their own unique set of complications. The wedding planner wants to know if you prefer the ice sculptures to be swans or hearts, Amara said from across their breakfast table, looking up from a tablet filled with decisions that seemed to multiply daily. Also, the caterer needs final numbers by tomorrow, the florist is threatening to quit if we change the color scheme again, and apparently we need to approve the font for the place cards. Marcus looked up from his dinosaur encyclopedia, syrup from his pancakes smeared across his cheek. Why can't we just go to the place where people get married in movies? You know, with the guy in the black dress who talks really fast. It's called Las Vegas, buddy, Jonathan said, reaching over to wipe Marcus's face with a napkin. And believe me, I've suggested it. Multiple times. But Amara said we have to have a big wedding because people are expecting it. Marcus's 8-year-old logic cut straight to the heart of the problem. Who are all these people anyway? I don't know any of them. Neither do I, Jonathan thought but didn't say. The guest list had grown from an intimate gathering of 50 to a media circus of 400, fueled by publicists and board members and social expectations that felt like chains around his neck. Every day brought new demands, new obligations, new reasons why their simple love story needed to become a performance for people who barely knew their names. It's complicated, sweetheart, Amara said, but Jonathan could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She'd been working 18-hour days, managing his schedule while planning a wedding that felt less like a celebration and more like a corporate merger with flowers. Maybe, Jonathan said carefully, setting down his coffee cup, we should talk about that. Amara's eyes sharpened with the intuition that had made her such a brilliant assistant. Talk about what? About whether we're planning our wedding or someone else's. The words hung in the morning air like smoke. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had survived media scrutiny, social pressure, and the constant presence of photographers documenting their every move. But it was the wedding planning that was slowly killing them. The endless decisions about things that didn't matter, the pressure to perform their love for an audience that had no stake in their happiness. The Hendersons called yesterday, Amara said quietly. They want to know if they can bring their business partners to the reception. People I've never met want to use our wedding as a networking opportunity. And Senator Morrison's wife thinks we should have the ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral because it will photograph better, Jonathan added. Never mind that neither of us is particularly religious. Marcus looked between them with the serious expression he wore when the adults in his life were about to make decisions that would affect his world. Are you guys fighting? No, buddy. We're just... Jonathan searched for words that would make sense to an 8-year-old. We're trying to figure out what we actually want versus what everyone else thinks we should want. That's easy, Marcus said with the confidence of childhood. You want to be married to each other, right? Right, Amara said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. And you want me to be your real son, not just the kid who lives here? More than anything, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Then why do you need 400 people to watch you do it? Can't you just do it?" The simplicity of the question hit both adults like lightning. Why did they need 400 people? Why did they need ice sculptures and place cards and a font approval process that had somehow consumed 3 weeks of their lives? "Because," Amara said slowly, "I think we got caught up in what we thought we were supposed to do instead of what we wanted to do." Jonathan reached across the table to take her hand, the engagement ring he'd chosen catching the morning light. "What do you want to do?" "I want to marry you," she said without hesitation. "I want Marcus to legally become our son. I want us to be a family without having to perform it for anyone else. Even if it means disappointing people? Even if it means dealing with the fallout from canceling a 400-person wedding." Amara looked at him, really looked, seeing past the stress and exhaustion to the man who'd knelt in a guest services office and promised her forever. Especially then. Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Amara said with a smile that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place, "that we elope." "Can I come?" Marcus asked immediately. "You're the most important guest," Jonathan assured him. "In fact, you're the only guest that matters." "What about all the people who are expecting invitations? The vendors, the deposits?" Amara's practical mind was already calculating the chaos they'd unleash. "What about them?" Jonathan's voice carried the same steel that had built his empire. "This is our life, our love, our family. We don't owe anyone else a performance. The media will go crazy. Let them. We'll be too busy being married to care." Marcus clapped his hands together with glee. "This is gonna be the best adventure ever." And suddenly, it felt like one. For the first time in months, their wedding felt like something they wanted instead of something they had to endure. 3 hours later, they were on Jonathan's private jet bound for a small island in the Caribbean where the only witnesses would be the officiant, the photographer they trusted, and the ocean itself. Amara had called their wedding planner to deliver the news, had listened to 20 minutes of hysteria about deposits and vendor contracts and social obligations, and then had hung up with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt since the day Jonathan first proposed. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as Manhattan disappeared beneath the clouds. "There's still time to turn back." "Never been more sure of anything in my life," Jonathan said, Marcus asleep between them with his head in Jonathan's lap and his feet tucked under Amara's arm. "This is what family looks like. This is what love looks like." "What about the board? The stockholders? We'll still be there when we get back," Jonathan interrupted. "But married. Legally a family. With a son who has our name and our protection and all the rights that come with being ours." Amara looked at Marcus, peaceful in sleep, then at Jonathan, more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Both of you. More than I thought it was possible to love anything. Even if we're about to cause the scandal of the century by running away 3 days before the wedding of the year. Especially then." Jonathan's smile was wicked. "Besides, what's the point of being rich and powerful if you can't occasionally tell the whole world to go to hell?" Amara laughed, the sound bright and free and full of the joy that had been buried under months of wedding planning stress. "Marcus is right, you know. This is going to be the best adventure ever." As their plane climbed toward the sun, carrying them toward a wedding that would be theirs and theirs alone, none of them thought about the headlines they'd create or the social expectations they were shattering. They thought only about forever, and the fact that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose love over everything else. Even when everything else includes 400 disappointed wedding guests and the social event of the season. Especially then. But as their plane descended toward the private island where they would finally become a legal family, Victoria Whitmore was placing one final desperate phone call from her Manhattan penthouse. "Richard? It's Victoria. I need you to listen very carefully." Her voice was sharp with barely controlled rage as she spoke to Richard Blackstone, chairman of Whitmore Industries Board of Directors. Jonathan has lost his mind. He's about to make a decision that will destroy the company. Victoria, I thought we were clear at the last board meeting. This isn't about my personal feelings, she interrupted, though they both knew it was exactly about that. This is about a CEO who's so delusional he thinks he can abandon a 400-person wedding 3 days before the ceremony without consequences. Do you have any idea what this will do to the company's reputation? There was a pause on the other end of the line. He eloped. He's in the air right now, flying to some godforsaken island with his maid and her brother. He's completely lost touch with reality, Richard. The man who used to understand that image matters, that stability matters, that... Victoria. Richard's voice was calm but firm. I'm going to stop you right there. You don't understand the implications. I understand them perfectly. What I don't understand is why you think the board would be anything but supportive of a CEO who prioritizes his family over a social obligation. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Victoria had been counting on outrage, on scandal, on the board's horror at Jonathan's behavior. She hadn't expected support. You can't be serious, she said finally. Dead serious. The preliminary numbers from the PR department are extraordinary. The stock price has jumped 4 points since the elopement story broke. Apparently, America loves a man who chooses love over expectation. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palm. And what about the vendors? The deposits? The social embarrassment of... will be handled by the company's public relations team. We're already spinning it as the romantic gesture of the century. CEO abandons society wedding for intimate family ceremony. The angles write themselves. This is insane, Victoria whispered. This is business. And right now, Jonathan's love story is very good for business. Richard's tone grew colder. Victoria, I'm going to give you some advice as someone who's known you for 15 years. Let this go. Move on. Find your own happiness instead of trying to destroy someone else's. The line went dead, leaving Victoria alone in her empty penthouse with the bitter taste of defeat and the realization that she'd lost Jonathan in every way that mattered. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Jonathan Whitmore was standing on a beach that looked like paradise, watching the woman he loved walk toward him in a simple white dress that had cost less than the flowers for their canceled reception. Marcus walked beside her in his best suit, carrying rings tied to a pillow with ribbons that fluttered in the ocean breeze. There were no photographers except the one they'd chosen, no guests except the 3 of them and the officiant who would make their family legal in the eyes of the world. The sun was setting over water that stretched to infinity, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and promise. You look beautiful, Jonathan said as Amara reached him, her feet bare in the sand, her smile brighter than all the diamonds he'd ever bought. You look happy, she replied, and it was true. For the first time in months, Jonathan looked like the man who'd fallen in love with her in his marble tower, relaxed, joyful, completely present in the moment they were creating together. Are you ready to be a family? The officiant asked, a kind-faced woman who'd performed ceremonies on this beach for 20 years and had never seen a couple more clearly meant for each other. We already are a family, Marcus piped up with 8-year-old confidence. We just need to make it official so Jonathan can sign my permission slips at school. The adults laughed, and the sound carried over the water like music. This was what love looked like, not the performance they'd been planning for Manhattan society, but the simple truth of 3 people who'd chosen each other against all odds and refused to let the world dictate how their story should unfold. Then let's make it official, the officiant said with a smile. As the ceremony began, as they spoke vows they'd written themselves while flying over the Atlantic, as Marcus presented the rings with the solemnity of someone entrusted with precious treasure, none of them thought about the chaos they'd left behind or the headlines they were creating. They thought only about forever, and the fact that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose love over everything else. Even when everything else includes the expectations of an entire world watching to see if fairy tales can survive in reality. Especially then. What do you think happens when love refuses to be performed for others, when a family decides their happiness matters more than public approval? Can three people who found each other in brokenness create something beautiful enough to inspire a world that's forgotten how to believe in happy endings? I'm breathless waiting to see how this impossible love story concludes. Share your thoughts on what forever looks like for these three hearts that chose each other. 1 year later, Jonathan Whitmore stood in the kitchen of their penthouse at dawn, watching his wife feed their 6-month-old daughter while Marcus practiced his presentation for the school science fair. The morning sun painted them all in golden light, and for a moment, Jonathan had to stop breathing just to take it all in, this life they'd built from the ashes of their separate brokenness. Sophia Marie Whitmore had arrived exactly 9 months after their Caribbean wedding, a tiny miracle with Amara's dark eyes and Jonathan's stubborn chin. Her birth had been featured on the cover of People magazine with the headline "The Love That Changed Everything." But here in their kitchen, she was simply their daughter. The final piece of a puzzle they hadn't known was incomplete. "Daddy, do you think the judges will like my volcano?" Marcus asked, looking up from his carefully constructed model with the serious expression he wore when seeking approval from the man who'd legally become his father 8 months ago. "I think they're going to be blown away," Jonathan said solemnly, and Marcus giggled at the pun with the pure joy of a 9-year-old who'd never learned to doubt that he was loved unconditionally. The transformation of their family had rippled outward in ways none of them had anticipated. Whitmore Industries had become a case study in how authenticity could drive success. Their stock had reached record highs, powered by a public that couldn't get enough of a CEO who chose love over convention. But more importantly, Jonathan had established the Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to supporting single parents and children in foster care, with Amara serving as its director. "The Henderson family wants to know if we can help with their adoption fees," Amara said, bouncing Sophia gently while reviewing foundation applications on her tablet. "They've been trying to adopt their foster daughter for 2 years, but the legal costs are beyond their means." "Approved," Jonathan said immediately. "What else?" "Mrs. Martinez from Lincoln Elementary wants to know if we can fund a breakfast program." Apparently, Marcus's story inspired her to start identifying kids who might be coming to school hungry. Jonathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. Marcus's collapse from hunger had nearly destroyed their family before it began, but now it was helping feed children across the city. Sometimes the most painful experiences became the most meaningful gifts when shared with others who needed to know they weren't alone. Also approved. Whatever she needs. "You can't approve everything, you know," Amara said with a smile that held all the warmth of their Caribbean sunrise wedding. "We're not infinite." "Watch me," Jonathan replied, leaning over to kiss her temple while Sophia grabbed his finger with the iron grip that babies use to stake their claim on the world. "Besides, we're about to become even less infinite." Amara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jonathan pulled out an official-looking document he'd been hiding behind the coffee maker. "The adoption agency called yesterday. There's a 14-year-old girl named Elena who's been in the system for 3 years. Her caseworker thinks we might be a good match." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and the kind of terror that came with loving someone so much you couldn't bear the thought of failing them. 14, Amara repeated. "She's been through 4 foster placements. Her parents died in a car accident, and she's been angry at the world ever since." Jonathan's voice grew softer. "They say she reminds them of someone who might understand what it's like to lose everything and find family in unexpected places." Marcus looked up from his volcano, his face bright with excitement. "I'm gonna have a big sister?" "Maybe," Jonathan said carefully. "If she wants us. If we all decide we're a good fit for each other." "Can she help me with my science projects?" Marcus asked, because at 9 years old, the practical considerations still mattered most. "I think she might like that," Amara said, already falling in love with a girl she'd never met but whose story felt achingly familiar. "When do we meet her?" "This weekend, if you're ready." Amara looked around their kitchen, at Marcus practicing his presentation, at Sophia gurgling contentedly in her arms, at Jonathan watching them all with the expression of a man who'd found his purpose in the people he loved, and felt her heart expand to make room for one more. "We're ready," she said, and meant it completely. 3 months later, Elena Whitmore Washington, she'd insisted on keeping both names, stood at the podium of the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala, looking out at a ballroom filled with Manhattan's elite and feeling nothing but fierce pride in the family that had chosen her when no one else would. "A year and a half ago," she began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally, "I was just another foster kid aging out of the system. I was angry, bitter, and convinced that happy families only existed in movies." She paused, finding her parents in the crowd, Jonathan in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, Amara radiant in midnight blue silk, Marcus squirming in his first real suit because he was finally old enough to attend grown-up parties. "Then I met the Whitmore family, and they taught me something I'd forgotten, that love isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you choose to give and receive, even when it's scary, even when you've been hurt before, even when it seems impossible." The applause was warm, but Elena barely heard it. She was focused on her family, on the way Jonathan's eyes shone with tears he didn't try to hide, on the way Amara held baby Sophia like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the way Marcus gave her a thumbs up that made her laugh despite the seriousness of her speech. "The Whitmore Foundation exists because my parents understand that families can be found in the most unexpected places, and that love has the power to heal wounds you thought were permanent. Tonight, we're not just raising money for children in need, we're proving that fairy tales can be real, that second chances exist, and that sometimes the most broken people create the most beautiful families." As she spoke, Elena caught sight of Victoria Whitmore at a table near the back, alone despite the crowd around her, her expression unreadable as she watched the family she tried to destroy flourish beyond her wildest imagination. There was something almost pathetic about her isolation, and Elena felt a stab of pity for a woman who'd chosen bitterness over the possibility of her own redemption. "In closing," Elena said, her voice strong and clear, "I want to thank my parents for showing me that love is a choice we make every day, and my siblings for teaching me that family isn't about blood, it's about showing up for each other, no matter what." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes, but Elena only had eyes for her family, for the people who'd taken a chance on an angry 14-year-old and loved her into becoming someone she actually liked being. Later, as the evening wound down and the last donors signed their final checks, the Whitmore family found themselves alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace, Manhattan sparkling beneath them like a jewelry box under starlight. "Did we really just raise $12 million? Amara asked, still processing the evening's success. $12.3 million, Jonathan corrected, pulling his wife closer while Sophia slept peacefully in her carrier. "And that's not counting the ongoing commitments from the tech billionaires who want to fund the entire scholarship program." Marcus, who'd somehow managed to stay awake despite the late hour, was conducting an elaborate scientific experiment with the remains of the chocolate fountain. "Can we use some of the money to buy a bigger apartment? Elena's room is really small, and when the new baby comes—" "What new baby?" Jonathan and Amara said in unison. Marcus looked up with the innocent expression of a child who just revealed a secret he didn't know was supposed to be kept. "The one Elena said you've been talking about. The little boy from Guatemala who needs heart surgery." Elena flushed red. "Marcus, they haven't decided yet." "Decided what?" Jonathan asked, though his heart was already racing with the familiar mixture of terror and joy that came with expanding their family. "There's a 3-year-old boy," Elena explained, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to explain. "His foster family can't afford the surgery he needs, and the state won't approve the placement because of his medical issues. I thought maybe, if we could help." The silence stretched between them as Jonathan and Amara processed the possibility of another addition to their already chaotic, beautiful, impossible family. "We'd need a bigger apartment," Amara said finally. "I've already been looking," Jonathan admitted. "There's a penthouse 2 blocks away with 5 bedrooms and a view of Central Park." 5 bedrooms. Elena's voice was carefully neutral, but there was hope hidden underneath it. "I was thinking we might need the space," Jonathan said with a smile that had first made Amara fall in love with him. For all the children who might need us." Marcus whooped with joy, Elena burst into tears of happiness, and Sophia woke up long enough to add her voice to the celebration with a gurgle that sounded suspiciously like approval. As they stood there on the rooftop, the five of them, soon to be six, wrapped in love and starlight and the kind of happiness that money couldn't buy but generosity could multiply, none of them thought about the cameras capturing the moment from the street below, or the headline that would run in tomorrow's papers. "The family that love built. Whitmore clan continues to grow." They thought only about tomorrow, and the child who needed them, and the endless capacity of the human heart to expand and heal and choose love over fear. Again and again and again. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning, Jonathan Whitmore stood in the kitchen of their Central Park West penthouse, watching his wife teach their youngest son Diego how to crack eggs while their daughter Sophia helped Marcus, now 14 and taller than his stepmother, study for his SATs. Elena, 19 and home from Colombia for the weekend, was reading applications for the Whitmore Foundation's newest initiative, a program that provided housing and support for young people aging out of foster care. "Dad," she said, looking up from a particularly compelling application, "there's a 17-year-old here who reminds me of myself when I first met you guys. She's been in 12 placements, has straight A's, and wants to be a doctor but has nowhere to go when she turns 18 next month." "What's her name?" Jonathan asked, already knowing what his answer would be. "Sarah. Sarah Chun." The irony wasn't lost on him, another Sarah entering their lives, but this one offering hope instead of heartbreak. "Set up a meeting," he said simply. "If she wants us, we want her." Amara looked up from her egg-cracking lesson with Diego, her face glowing with the same light that had first stopped Jonathan's heart in his marble tower 7 years ago. "Are you sure?" she asked. 7 children might be pushing it, even for us." 6, Jonathan corrected. "Marcus is going to college next year, Elena's got her own apartment, and at some point, they're going to start families of their own. There's always room for one more. Besides," Marcus added without looking up from his practice test, "someone's got to teach Diego proper pranking techniques before I leave for MIT. It might as well be Sarah." The laughter that filled their kitchen was warm and bright and completely genuine, the sound of a family that had learned to find joy in the unexpected, beauty in the broken, and love in the spaces where logic said it couldn't possibly fit. Later that evening, after homework was finished and stories were read and the smaller children were tucked into beds that had never known hunger or fear or abandonment, Jonathan and Amara sat on their bedroom balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't answered that phone call from Mrs. Patterson?" Amara asked, curled against Jonathan's side in a position that had become as natural as breathing. "Every day," Jonathan admitted. "But then I remember that some things are just meant to be. You were always going to save me, and I was always going to save you. We just had to find each other first. Even if it meant everything falling apart before it could come together. Especially then." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of the expensive shampoo she still wasn't quite used to but now couldn't imagine living without. "The best love stories always start with impossible odds." "And how do they end?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They don't," Jonathan said, his voice warm with certainty. "They just keep beginning over and over again, every time someone chooses love over fear." As they sat there in the darkness, wrapped in each other and the life they'd built from the ruins of their separate sorrows, neither of them mentioned the documentary crew that would arrive next week to film their story, or the book deal that would turn their love story into inspiration for millions of people who'd forgotten that happy endings were possible. They thought only about tomorrow, and the girl named Sarah who might need them, and the endless capacity of the human heart to expand and heal and choose love over everything else that seemed more practical, more reasonable, more safe. Because sometimes, the most practical thing you could do was believe in magic. Sometimes, the most reasonable choice was the one that made no sense to anyone but you. And sometimes, the safest place in the world was in the arms of someone who'd found you when you'd lost yourself, and loved you back to life one impossible day at a time. In their penthouse high above Manhattan, the Whitmore family slept peacefully, dreaming dreams of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow, secure in the knowledge that love had made them a legend, but more importantly, it had made them home. And in the end, home was the only fairy tale that ever really mattered. Do you believe that some love stories are powerful enough to change not just the people living them, but everyone who witnesses them? Can broken people really build something so beautiful that it inspires the world to believe in second chances again? This family that started with a desperate woman, a broken man, and a hungry child has become proof that fairy tales don't just exist. They can be created by anyone brave enough to choose love over fear, again and again and again. What's your favorite moment from their impossible journey together?